looks like we still have some people who will trickle into the Zoom room, but we are live on Facebook. So let's go ahead and get started. And then if anybody misses it, then we'll catch them up. Hello, welcome. I'm so happy to have Representative Jessica Faye and Jess Maurer of the Maine Council on Aging here with us today to talk about supports for the direct care workforce. And I am Desti Homan-Sprague of the Maine Women's Lobby. I will have our guests introduce themselves in just a moment and give us a bit of context about this issue. But for folks who are here with us in the Zoom room or who are watching on Facebook Live, just want to remind you that you're welcome to bring your questions or comments if you have sort of curiosity about why the direct care workforce matters and how this legislation came to be. And the legislative process to get solutions like this passed, please feel free to lift those questions up. You can put them in the chat here, or you can put them in the chat on Facebook, and we'll be sure to bring those to the speakers. Also, if you're in the Zoom room, you're welcome to ask a question live. Just know that you will be on the Facebook live stream and the video if you ask that question live. So I think that's our housekeeping. Representative Faye, let's start with you if you want to just introduce yourself.
Sure, thanks, Desti, and thanks for having this. It's really a privilege to be able to talk about this issue outside the legislature with folks who are interested and maybe want to become a little bit more involved in the process. So I really appreciate the opportunity. I'm State Representative Jessica Faye. I represent House District 66, which is parts of the towns of Casco, Poland, and Raymond. And in the 129th legislature, I served as the House Chair of the Commission to Study Long-Term Care Workforce Issues. And we met from September through December. It was so long ago now. We met from September through December and really took a deep dive into the issue around the long-term care workforce and the shortage of workers and the impact that that has on people whose lives and well-being and independence and the way that they can live their best lives depends in no small part towards having access to the direct care workforce. So that's where I'm coming from.
Great, thank you. And Jess Maurer from the Maine Council on Aging, you want to introduce yourself and tell us a little about MCOA?
Sure, thanks so much for having us. So I'm Jess Maurer, I'm the Executive Director of the Maine Council on Aging, and we are a broad multidisciplinary network of more than 100 organizations, businesses, municipalities, and older people who are working collectively to make sure we can all live healthy, engaged, secure lives in our homes and communities. And we actually were the driving force behind the legislation to create the Commission to Study Long-Term Care Workforce Issues, and have been leading a conversation coalition efforts on this issue since 2015. Really excited to be here and talking about these issues.
Great. Does it seem like maybe the place to start is with the commission findings? Because it sounds like that's what sort of solidified this next effort and some of the proposals that have come forward into this session. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things that the commission did was had some legislation attached to the report, which I think we'll put in the chat. There's a lot of really good information and lots of resources and references in that report. The staff that works on it, the OPLA staff, Anna Broom was our analyst, and she did a fantastic job writing this report. But attached to the report was some legislation which actually was in process. I think it was LD 2109, and it had a reference to the HHS committee. I think it was like the day before we adjourned in 2020 for COVID. So we are, I feel like, a year behind where we were and where we should be. So picking up where we left off, after the election, I reintroduced that bill, but also added some additional pieces to it. So there are 29 recommendations in the report, and not all of them required legislation. Some of them were things that that we sent letters to the department, and then the committee, the HHS committee, which is the committee of jurisdiction for this area, you know, sent some letters. But the stuff that required legislation, I have put into an omnibus bill for the Health and Human Services Committee to hear, and it's still in LR form. It doesn't have an LD number, which means that it is being drafted as we speak in the revisor's office, and the final language hasn't come out yet. I'm hoping that that will be soon. But in that bill, we're taking the recommendations under the jurisdiction of the Department of Health and Human Services, which includes the very popular topic of rates, which is what basically how people who are taking care of people who are receiving Maine care, how they're paid. So I think it can get pretty deep and pretty complex. So I'm going to try really hard, and somebody just kind of stop me if I'm going a little bit too deep into the weeds, because I have a habit of doing that, and I apologize in advance. One of the things we want to do is make sure that the rates include some of the mandates on providers so that they can pay for those mandates, as well as pay a reasonable wage to the caregiving workforce. And I think I'm going to let Jess talk about why that's important, because I could go off on a tangent. But
does it make sense to do that right now, to just sort of like
yeah,
a little word on the context of you know, why rates matter to the direct care workforce?
Absolutely.
Sure. Well, I mean, this is, and I think why we're here today, I mean, this is a big issue of equity. And this workforce in particular has been widely ignored from economic analysis, even though it is a huge economic driver here in Maine. And that's in large part because the folks who do this work are women. And historically, it's actually, historically, you know, as this country was forming, it was slaves and immigrants who did this work, always women. And it has evolved into a profession that is largely dominated by women, often people of color, continues to be people who are new Americans or new Mainers who are doing this work. And so honestly, these are folks who have been undervalued for work that is undervalued. In other words, caring for people who are not seen as productive in relation to the economy. So whether that's children, although of course they are always our future, so we want to take care of them, but people who are disabled, who have severe cognitive difficulties, and or, you know, can't work anymore for whatever reason, sort of aren't contributing to, or are seen, I'm sorry, because they sure are, but they are seen as not contributing to our economy, or to our communities, or to the fabric of our social life, those sorts of things. So it's really an undervalued group of people taking care of an undervalued group of people that has resulted in historically low wages. It's not just Maine, but it's, you know, nationally, internationally, for this kind of work.
So I think that feels like really good and important context for thinking about why these roles matter and why these roles are so undervalued. And it sounds like, you know, I think we can make the connection toward when people need direct care supports and they are also accessing those supports through Maine Care, then they themselves are probably the most sort of marginalized or vulnerable populations. And so am I right in hearing that the Commission identified that the Maine Care reimbursement rates are really low to do the job?
And I'll just jump in for one quick second to say, we are, you know, unlike what I was just saying sort of about this being historical, we're in an extraordinarily unusual place here in Maine, in that we, you know, have a shrinking working age population. And so every earner in Maine is hotly sought after. And so there's, you know, in our market economy, we have employers of all kinds paying, you know, sort of top dollar for workers and incentivizing them to come into their workforce and providing full benefits and, you know, sort of on and on, even sign-on incentives now in some really interesting industries. Because we just don't have enough workers in Maine. And so when you think about the reimbursement rates being set at, you know, what are other states paying? Or, you know, what's a reasonable rate to pay for this? They're not factoring into the fact that these kinds of employers of, you know, people who care for people, we call them essential care workers, that they have to compete in the same market for workers. But they are literally hamstrung by the reimbursement rates. And so we've been really this session trying to talk about the idea that we're just having the wrong conversation. We should be talking about this workforce writ large and how important this workforce is to our economy. It allows for other people to work, right? If you have a child with intellectual disabilities, or you're caring for a parent with dementia in your home and you're a worker, if you can't get care, you can't go to work. And so, you know, it's an economic driver in a couple of different ways, not just, you know, the folks who are in the workforce, but also the fact that they are caring for people who are also workers. You know, I mean, the family caregivers. So we just feel like we have to be talking about why these essential care workers should be earning a livable wage in Maine and should have access to benefits and other quality issues. I think the work that Representative Faye did with the Commission is the very start. But it looks at this workforce holistically and makes recommendations around career pathway, around quality workforce, about access to training, advancement. So it's not just about rates, but honestly, right now, reimbursement rates being as they are and set the way they are, we're never going to get to that place where we're valuing these workers in a way that is holistic and really sort of lifting the whole segment up. Which is what we need to do.
It's a really helpful context. And just to clarify, because there's a quick question in the chat, rates, we're really talking about people who are accessing care through Maine Care. But for people who have private insurance, is direct care covered?
No, no.
Okay.
Medicare. This is something that Medicare doesn't cover unless you're transitioning from hospital. You know, so if you break your hip and you go into the hospital and then you go into rehab and then you go home and you need home care, that is covered for some period of time under Medicare, but it's always related to a medical issue. Otherwise, personal support services is what we call it. It's called different things for different populations. But these are folks that there's no reimbursement for, and you either are paid for through Maine Care or out of pocket. And the key here is that this undervaluation of this workforce goes into the private pay industry. And so this becomes a little bit more complex. But it's also because we're the most rural state in the country, and we have the smallest working age population in the country. And I was going to talk to you a little bit more about inequity around older women and their incomes. But what we have essentially a very large older population who doesn't have very high income. And so there's only so much out of pocket they can actually spend for this sort of service. And so if you think about you being a private pay provider, so I'm only taking private money, I'm not taking any, reimbursement from anybody else, not the VA, not the state, not Maine Care. I have to have a certain number of people to make my business model work. And I have to pay these workers. I'm competing for the same number of workers. And so I have to pay them a certain wage, and I'm going to pass that cost onto the consumer, which means I'm going to increase my per hour cost to you. It means I'm going to lose a bunch of clients every time I do. So when I go from $25 to $30 an hour, only so many people are going to be able to pay $30 an hour. And so the business model doesn't work there either. And what you end up happening, and we're seeing this across the state, is that providers are hiring as many workers as they can at that sort of sweet spot, and are just serving as many people as they can with the number of workers they have. And so we're finding universally people who have money who can't hire caregivers. Like, they have lots of money. We just heard from a geriatrician at Maine General that a guy that they treated for early onset Alzheimer's had to be institutionalized, even though they had tons of money, because they couldn't find home care workers to support his needs. And so this is, something that a person shouldn't have been, institutionalized in that setting for that reason. And then it's going to impoverish his wife because she's going to have to pay out of pocket all their resources for maybe 10 years. So it's a very complex situation. And it really needs, a vision. We need a vision, a big vision from this administration, from this legislature. That's why we're working with Jess Faye. She's a visionary.
Well, that's a great segue. And I see a few questions in here that are sort of about like strategy and moving forward and next steps. So I'll try to hold on to those threads. Let's shift then from that really great context to some of the solutions then that are in this bill or this package of bills, and hear a bit about what solutions they're proposed, and then we can kind of think about strategy moving those forward. So Representative Faye, what are the pieces in the bills that you want to list up?
Sure. So there's a couple, and primarily around rates, but not totally around rates. So we're talking about rate setting and what goes into that formula, including something which we haven't talked about that's specifically required, called electronic visit verification, which brings up broadband access and the cost of technology, background checks, and paid family leave requirements. So currently the rates do not take those things into consideration. So we want to make sure that as the rate is being set, that it covers all the costs of those things and others. And then we need to prioritize in the process of rate setting, which there are tons of rates that cover all kinds of different services through Maine Care. And we want to make sure that aging and disability service providers are, including state funded and care coordination, are prioritized for those rate studies. rates should not go any lower than they are currently. And sometimes when the department does rates, sometimes they actually come out lower than they are currently. We want to make sure that that doesn't happen. And then, of course, we want to make sure that that the portion of the rate that goes directly to the worker never goes below 125% of minimum wage. And then, since we do have some automatic increases in the minimum wage, we need to make sure that that rate is not static, and that it doesn't just sit there for 5 years as minimum wage goes up, and the rate stays the same. It's a law of diminishing returns. And then there are some other things that happen for long-term care, institutional long-term care, where there's rebasing and there's also a cost of living adjustment, and we want to make sure that that's available for home and community-based services as well. Lots of technical stuff. The other piece is, you may not be surprised to learn that in 2010, there was a Long-Term Care Workforce Commission that came up with some recommendations, and many of those were never implemented. So one of the pieces that's really important to me is to establish an ongoing oversight commission. You can call it any number of different things, that would make sure that these recommendations, should they be put in statute, and even if even the ones that aren't, are continuing to be worked on, so that it's not one of those situations where we do really good work as a commission and then the report and the recommendations sort of sit there and nothing happens. So that's the real technical pieces of LR 440. And when it comes out, the LD will be, I don't know what, but it's an act to implement the recommendations of the long-term care workforce. So that's that bill. and again, we haven't had what we call cycle 2, which is, I haven't even gotten the language back from like the draft form yet to tweak it, and we may tweak that. We still have that opportunity. So actually doing this before the final draft is really interesting for me to hear what questions come up, and if there are things that we can do to address those questions in the bill, or that there's something that we haven't thought of that might be helpful. And I could talk more, but I do just want to quickly mention that there are 2 other bills. One is lifted, it's LD 886, and that bill is literally a direct lift of language from the report, which asks for the Department of Labor to specifically target in a PR campaign, bringing people into the direct care workforce. And so that bill has actually been referred to the Labor and Housing Committee. It has not been set for a public hearing yet. And then there's another that's a concept draft, which has to do with the workers and the benefits that they receive if they're low income, and the limits on earned wages and access to some public assistance. And there is some wiggle room in the language around those benefits from that are passed through from the federal government, those income requirements that we could conceivably allow folks to access benefits and earn a little bit more than they are currently earning, thus kind of moving the cliff, as the benefits cliff. So it's a lot, I know.
It is a lot, and I wonder, in terms of the strategy for this bill moving forward, I'm interested in hearing this bill or this collection of bills, like, what do you think the opportunities for moving this forward are? And I'll also just reflect back on a comment or two in the chat where, we're hearing from Orion that people serving folks in poverty should not themselves have to take a vow of poverty. We heard, I think from Megan farther up that, we talked about childcare and so many of those providers also being undervalued and not receiving a living wage. So we have a lot of questions that this raises in general about if there's an effort to synergize or create connections between these different kinds of care roles and sort of team up strategically. I don't want to derail that in our last 4 minutes, but
Oh no, this is the
one.
This is the most important piece, and I'll let Jess, because she's got a real good handle on that, talk about that a little bit.
So, I mean, so this is, what we're talking about now. And I will say, I so appreciate our relatively new partnership with the Maine Women's Lobby and your interest in these issues, and want to start talking about older women too, not just this direct care workforce issue. But I will say, we feel like we need a very big and very different vision for essential care workers in Maine. And I will very clearly say, we have had this conversation with the early care and education folks as well. They think it won't work what we're talking about for them, but we are in the same, we support this idea that we have to say where you have a worker that is essentially doing the same sort of services. It is a little different with kids, I'll just say, but what I like to say, right, is a shower is a shower is a shower is a shower. It doesn't matter. You're giving a shower to somebody in their own home, in a group home, in a nursing home. That shower is the same activity. And those folks who are providing meals and getting people dressed and, giving personal care to all sorts of populations in Maine should all be paid the same, and they should be paid a livable wage. And we should have this as a vision for Maine. This workforce is one of the few workforces in the country that is expected to grow over the next 3 decades. And it's a critical workforce, and we can be driving our economy by making investments in what's called the social care workforce. That's a particularly good thing to do at a time when your economy is sluggish and you have a lot of workers out of work. So this is a really great opportunity to do that. And so we're suggesting that it's time to say, the legislature to say, we commit to this. We commit to paying a living wage to these workers. We know we can't do it right now in this session, in this moment in time, in this pandemic, economy, but that's our vision. And we're going to do something right now. And we're going to tell a work group to go off and tell us how we can move this workforce to a livable wage in 5 years. That's our big sort of idea. We really need women, and we really need people who work in this profession to start talking, and they are so busy living their lives, as all has been put forth here, right? They're busy trying to take care of their own kids, take care of their own parents, find out how to put food on the table, and they're doing their work. They don't have time to do all of this. So we need to figure out how to include their voices in a meaningful way in this conversation as we get moving forward. But we also just need a whole lot more people saying we have to have this vision. Jess?
Amen.
All right, in 1 more minute, what do you hope people know or do as a result of what we've talked about here today?
I hope people know that the long-term care workforce is undervalued, and it is partially because of the historical context of how these jobs have become something that is paid work, and what people should do is let their legislators know, particularly if they have experience directly, either as a caregiver or as somebody who needs care, or as the family member of someone who needs care, how important this is and why we need to pay these workers more. And that has to do with value and dignity and not just living. Although living is, you know, the baseline sort of important piece, but we're going to pay people more if we value the work more, I think.
I just also just dropped my 3 cents in, which is the cost of long-term care in Maine exceeds that of most other states, almost all other states in the country, and where most Mainers aren't going to be able to afford it. So this is about you. It's about your family. It's about older people you love, and folks with disabilities that you love. And we really need to have a bunch more people start standing up.
Yeah, I think that is so great, and that is a great spot to end on. Jess, I hope you don't mind. I'm going to paste that comment over in our Facebook thread too, so folks can see that, who are maybe watching the video later. I think that's it for today. Thanks to Representative Faye, thanks to Jess Maurer and the Maine Council on Aging. I'm so happy that you were able to join us. And I look forward to seeing folks next week. I think we're going to be talking about the Earned Income Tax Credit for Maine with Senator Vitelli. So,
awesome. Thank you, Dusty. Appreciate the opportunity to be here.
Thanks so much. Have a great day.